I recorded a terrifying encounter with a private security guard. What they found will haunt you. I never should have opened that door the moment I did. An icy breeze swept through the musty air, sending chills crawling down my spine. My heart raced as I stood frozen, the darkness beyond the entryway thick enough to choke on. It was an ordinary Thursday evening, twilight slowly fading, casting long shadows across my living room. I flicked the lights, the hum barely reaching through the creeping dread wrapping around my throat. My phone buzzed incessantly, notifications of mundane tasks and trivial updates. I wished I could ignore it all, but my curiosity got the better of me. The door, old and warped, creaked in low tones, like a voice soft with warning. Yet, something in the back of my mind whispered that this was just the air settling. I reached for the knob. Cold metal met my fingertips, and an electric thrill surged through me. With one swift turn, I threw open the door, but what lay beyond was a suffocating void. An abyss haunted by silence and the unmistakable scent of decay. A shuffle echoed from inside, not the friendly stir of a pet or the comforting rustle of familiar furniture. This was unearthly. Whispering voices slipping through the cracks in my sanity. My palms went clammy. The shadows scoffed at my presence, checking my courage, daring me to step over the threshold. I couldn't stop now. I held my breath, stepping inside. Darkness closed in, grabbing at my ankles like skeletal fingers. I strained my ears. A faint sound pulsed through the stillness, a distant thud, like something large hitting the ground. Was it my imagination, or was something moving in the dark? Suddenly, I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned. Nothing but the twisted shapes of forgotten objects stood frozen in silence. I backed away, heart pounding, my senses screaming at me to leave. But the mystery tugged at my mind, and I took another step. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. My breath hitched as my body went cold with fear. Where was that guard? Was he supposed to be here? A sudden crash shattered the quiet, and I stumbled backward, bumping against a wall, afraid to breathe. And then I saw a figure, barely discernible in the gloom, looming. My heart dropped into my stomach. A scream clawed at my throat, but nothing came out. The extremity of dread left me speechless, rooted in place. Who or what waited for me on the other side of that darkness, just beyond reach? Hey! Before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The figure lurked just beyond the edge of the darkness, shifting ever so slightly, as if waiting for the light to reveal its form. My heart hammered furiously within my chest as thoughts raced through my mind. Was that the guard? Had he been injured, trapped somehow? Or was this something else entirely, some dark embodiment of the anxiety that had spilled into my reality? I stood rooted, each passing second stretching into eternity. And then, with a sudden surge of courage mixed with sheer terror, I willed my legs to move, edging closer to the obscured figure while squinting into the inky blackness. The pungent odor of mold and rot grew stronger, ramping up my nausea. I had never been fond of basements, and whatever lurked down here smelled like nightmares festering in the corners of my memory. Suddenly, I was acutely aware of my own breath, too loud, too intrusive, like a siren blaring in the stillness. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling as it shattered the heavy silence. First, there was no response. But then came the answer, a chilling whisper, as if the shadows themselves had conspired to torment me. "You shouldn't have come here." The words spiraled around me, grasping at my throat, revoking my sense of safety. Panic surged through my body, and I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the damp floor. The figure shifted again. This time, The rapidity of its movement seemed almost desperate rush out of darkness. My instincts screamed for me to leave, to dart away and shut the door against whatever malevolence lay within. But my feet disobeyed, locked in a frozen state of horror. Something glinted in the murky shadows, a flash of silver catching my eye. It was a badge, smeared with a film of grime and something darker. My chest constricted as realization hit. This was the guard's badge. Not just any security officer. Had been the one to warn me, to keep me from whatever dwelled here. With trembling fingers, I touched the cold metal, trying to shake off the feeling that I shouldn't have come. But a noise behind me made my heart leap into my throat. A low, guttural growl echoed, bridging the gap between the dark and me, heavy like a weight pressing down on my chest. Instinctively, I turned, eyes wide, searching the shadows for whatever was making that sound. The figure stood still, watching, and then I saw a shift beside it. My breath caught. There was another just behind the first. A disfigured silhouette stretched and contorted, limbs twisted in impossible angles. Its mouth twisted into a rictus grin that would freeze time. The creature opened its maw, and the sickening growl morphed into a chilling laugh that seemed to echo from the very depths of the abyss. That I turned again to the door, desperate to escape, and found it slamming shut as if held by an unseen force. My heart raced. There was no way out. Cold sweat trickled down my back as I heard footsteps converging from both sides, a symphony of dread approaching. Panic surged within me. I rushed forward, ready to face whatever horrors awaited, feeling an oppressive weight against my chest, as though the very air conspired to keep me imprisoned. The darkness seemed to swirl closer, pulling me in like a hurricane of despair. But when I steeled myself against the unseen horrors, a deep, echoing voice whispered from the shadows, "Stay, I promise you won't remember." And in that instant, everything went black. I felt myself plummet into an unfathomable nothingness. There was no sound, no sense of time, only an all-consuming silence swallowing me whole. And then, from somewhere, something cold and sharp pierced the void, drawing forth a scream that wasn't my own. I jolted awake, but I wasn't in the basement anymore. The room was lit with a sickly flicker, the walls suddenly closing in, echoes of laughter reverberating around me, taunting me. In the reflection of a cracked mirror, jagged pieces gleamed, revealing the basement's oppressive darkness once again, threaded into my reality. I wasn't alone. There were faces, the terrified faces of the lost, shadows bound to darkness eternally. They reached for me, opening their mouths in silent screams. And in that moment, realization dawned as a figure loomed closer behind me, shadows extending like fingers around my throat. "Welcome back." The familiar voice sent a jolt of terror through my veins, and I spun around to face what was once the guarda grotesque mockery of his former self. A hollow shell of regret filled with malice as his eyes glowed with unholy purpose. And as I gasped, the door behind me began to close once more, an impenetrable abyss both beckoning and forbidding me to step back into the darkness, forcing me to make a choice that might seal my fate forever. The air in the room felt tangible, thick with the scent of decay and despair that threatened to suffocate me. My heart thundered violently as I stared into the vacant eyes of what had once been a mana protector turned predator. His lips curled into a twisted smile that oozed malice. "You shouldn't have come back here," he rasped, each word dripping with venom. My mind raced. I needed to escape, but the weight of his presence was suffocating. I glanced at the door, my only potential exit, and its steady creep toward closure felt deliberate, almost mocking. The laughter echoed louder, reverberating against the walls, as if mocking my predicament. The tormented faces in the cracked mirror shifted, their silent screams evolving into a cacophony of desperate pleas, urging me to run. But I didn't move, couldn't. "Why did you bring them back?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling under the weight of unearthly dread. His laughter intensified, the sound warping into a symphony of despair. "This place remembers, my dear. It remembers everything. And now, so do you." A wave of dread washed over me as a shiver cascaded down my spine. The shadows around him flickered, elongating and twisting like serpents ready to strike. I couldn't take my eyes off him. His features became more grotesque with each second. Skin stretched taut over bone, darkness seeping into the cracks of his existence. As he edged closer, I could see the remnants of his humanity flicker within the abyss. "Join them," he hissed, gesturing to the tormented faces frozen in the mirror. "You belong here now." A sudden surge of clarity broke through my fear, and instinct kicked in. I bolted toward the door as fast as my trembling legs would allow. But the shadows writhed, clawing at my ankles, pulling me down, anchoring me to the spot. I fought against the invisible bonds that threatened to ensnare me entirely. "Let me go!" I screamed, adrenaline coursing through my body. But it was no use. With a sinister grin, he raised a hand, and the shadows converged, swirling like a storm around me. I couldn't breathe. The oppressive darkness pushed against me, squeezing out the light. The air crackled with energy, and I felt the ground beneath me shift, forming into a resinous tar that attempted to swallow me whole. "Your fears have brought you here. Embrace them," he taunted, and in that moment, the voices from the mirror reached a fever pitch, screaming not only for me but through Mimi inner turmoil laid bare. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, cascading shards across the floor like falling stars. Each glimmering piece represented a part of me lost, memories scattered through time, some joyous, others grim. The realization sank in. The more I fought, the stronger the darkness became. I needed to face it or succumb completely. "Feed on my fear, if you wish," I shouted defiantly, forcing myself to ground my resolve, willing the trembling to subside. With that thought, the grasp of shadows weakened ever so slightly, allowing me to take a shuddering step back, toward the door, as I clung to the slivers of hope scattered amongst my fractured memories. "Hate," I sneered, finding an ember of strength. "I can't remember who I was, but I will never surrender to darkness." The guard's face morphed in rage, shadows erupting from his form, devouring the air itself. "You're too late," his voice thundered, snapping through the room, shattering my focus. "The shadows have claimed you." With that, I lunged toward the door, adrenaline pulsing, but as I pushed against it, it held firm. The terror clawed at my mind, whispering doubts, each his further drawing me back. In one last desperate attempt, I screamed my own name, a proclamation against the shadows, a desperate plea to the memories that would not let go. And then, just as I thought I could not hold on any longer, the door began to vibrate, then warped open. A blinding white light poured through the crack, illuminating the darkened confines of my prison. But the guard's laughter turned into an otherworldly shriek as arms of shadow lashed out desperately to reclaim me. With a final surge, I slipped through the opening, tumbling into the light, but it wasn't salvation. I was surrounded by endless darkness again, the echoes of my own scream ringing across an infinite abyss stretching into forever, and as I turned back to face what had pursued me, I saw his grotesque form now merging with the shadows themselves, but in one hand he clutched a shard of mirror. "You can run, but you can never truly escape," he growled, before vanishing into the dark. I was alone, suspended in that bleak oblivion, the shard of mirror crushing in my hand. I glanced down to see my reflection staring back, yet it felt wrong, distorted. Suddenly the face distorted, morphing into the guard's twisted smile, as if he were waiting for me to shatter once and for all. Before I could comprehend what was about to happen next, the ground quaked beneath me, cracks spiraling outward, darkness flowing from them like ink across water. And then I began to fall. As I plummeted into the ever-hungry void, time warped, stretching and compressing in a maddening rhythm. I reached out, clawing at the inky darkness that engulfed me, the gripping terror leaving me breathless. Was this the end or merely a violent transition to something far worse? The whispers in the shadows thickened, swirling around me like a tempest of despair, each syllable dripping with malice. "Welcome to the abyss," a voice echoed from somewhere beyond the swirling darkness. It was low and rich, dripping with familiar contempt, the voice of the guard, yet it felt simultaneously otherworldly. My descent slowed impossibly, and I found myself suspended in a void that felt sentient, amorphous shadows staring back at me with a malevolent hunger. Flickering images flared to life like the dying breaths of dying stars. Fragments of reality interspersed with visions of twisted nightmares, lost faces that beckoned for liberation, while also drowning in despair. Good riddance. One echoed, a face I recognized but dared not name. Choking down a sob, I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to block them out. Join us! Join us! The chorus crescendoed, their voices rising above the tempests of my mind. I couldn't discern friend from foe in this sea of chaos. It felt like being engulfed in a storm where every passerby was both a savior and a demon. And then, silence, heavy, suffocating silence, punctuated only by the distant sound of something pulling. It tugged at my being, resonating through the depths of my sullen, insatiable draw that hinted at answers, or perhaps, finality. I was drawn toward a pulsating light that became clearer with each passing heartbeat. The sight of it filled me with both hope and dread. Was I being beckoned to salvation or utter destruction? As I approached, the darkness around me writhed, angry and hungry, reaching out like desperate limbs trying to reclaim their lost prey. Don't fight it! The guard's voice, now a taunting hiss, seeped through the darkness. You're part of this realm now. Come and witness the truth. The light expanded until it became a vast horizon of brilliance, vibrant and throbbing with energy that challenged the very shadows trying to ensnare me. Steeling my trembling nerves, I jumped forward, connecting with the warmth of the light, piercing through the suffocating darkness. The guard's maniacal laughter snapped through the air as shadows clawed at me from all sides, a cacophony of frustrated rage filling the void. I could feel them peeling away, panic in their touch as I forced myself deeper into the light. What lay ahead warped into recognition. A trampled path of memories paved with fragmented horrors. Faces I thought I'd forgotten scuttled forward, some familiar and comforting, others contorted in pain and fear, fragments of the past I had tried to escape. Each specter seemed to cry out to me, yearning to reclaim their lost connection. I yelled, thrashing against this onslaught of nostalgia. Each memory felt like a grasp, tugging me back into despair. I don't want to return. But the more I fought, the tighter their grip became, as the memories merged into a seamless tapestry that threatened to engulf me whole. Then I saw it. At the apex of this swirling amalgamation, an image caught my breath short, a scene from just days before. My own reflection in the mirror, distorted by the shadows, a spectral grimace of terror. Yet, intertwined was the guard's twisted visage glaring back at me, his smile wide, knowing. He had been inside my mind all along, a vile parasite feeding off my fear. With a desperate urge, I clutched the shard of mirror harder, the jagged glimmer cutting into my palm, blood spilling into the swirling void. It was a sacrifice, a visceral tether to my humanity. The moment the blood touched the vibrant light, it pulsed fiercely, rippling outward and urging the memories to shatter and no more. I bellowed, thrusting the shard toward the encroaching darkness. The moment it made contact, a shockwave of energy erupted, fracturing the landscape of memories and shadows. Specters howled as they ripped apart, shadows shrieking in agony, unraveling before my eyes. But in that moment of fleeting freedom, I noticed something lurking, far outside the reach of the shattered memories. Something dark and ancient, waiting for the remnants of fear to settle into place and seize what was left of me. Like a predator savoring its prey, a sudden stillness followed, heavy with dread. And within that stillness, a new shadow blossomed, more profound than the rest, its form towering and sinister. It loomed, unfurling with 1,000 eyes aglow, each one fixating on me with an unholy hunger. An old realization flooded my senses. The guard was a mere puppet compared to what now stirred. You thought you could escape? It whispered, the darkness curling into my thoughts. You are forever entwined, forever mine. Before I could respond, the ground beneath me shattered, and I was thrust headfirst into an endless plummet, my scream merging with the terrible laughter of the abyss that claimed me once again. And in my final moments of consciousness, I felt a cold, clammy hand gripping my ankle, pulling me deeper into a new horror that would echo through eternity. Waking up was not a gentle process. It felt like surfacing from the depths of a freezing lake, gasping for air. I blinked against an oppressive darkness that didn't seem to dissipate, suffocating my senses. There were no walls, no ceiling, only the sensation of floating. As if suspended in a void where gravity itself had deemed me irrelevant, I instinctively tried to move, panic rising like bile in my throat. My limbs felt heavy, bound by an unseen force. Just when I thought I could get control of my body, an icy touch slid against my skin, a stark contrast to the emptiness surrounding me, paralyzing my resolve. "Welcome back," a voice purred, a familiar caress soaked in malice that sent waves of dread rippling through my being. There was no doubt. This voice belonged to the guard. "I've been waiting. Where are you?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper against the oppressive silence. My eyes darted around, searching the unending darkness for any trace of the guard. But it was as if my words dissolved into the void. "Losing yourself is a fascinating experience, isn't it?" The voice echoed, reverberating like a pulsing heartbeat. "You've seen so much already. The shadows aren't finished with you yet. Not by a long shot." With those words, the darkness began to tremble, quaking with a malevolent energy. Ripples of spectral forms coiled around me, grotesque and twisted figures emerging from the abyss. They shimmered with the glimmers of lost souls woven together in a tapestry of despair, each face a ghastly reminder of what they had endured. Their mouths moved, forming silent screams that reverberated through my skull, their suffering echoing in my veins. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the impending horror. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, a futile attempt to reclaim my nerve. But only those tortured visages stared back at me, dancing at the edges of perception. A jumble of whispers wove together, drawing nearer and nearer, the chorus of laments growing louder, more impatient. "Join us," they urged, pleading and angered all at once. "Join us before it's too late." Just when I thought I could bear it no longer, the ground beneath me shifted violently. Dark tendrils shot up, wrapping around my ankles, pulling me into an inky pit that opened like a maw. I clawed at the air, gasping, but the more I struggled, the tighter their grip became, and then, a flash pierced the darkness, a blinding light that momentarily cast aside the shadows. In its place stood a figure, draped in a tattered cloak of shimmering obsidian. But what was worst were the empty sockets where eyes should have been. It radiated malevolence and ancient power, an echo of whatever had previously lurked in the shadows. "Foolish child," it hissed, the sound skittering along my spine. "You believe you can sever your ties? This realm thrives on the essence of fear, and you are the perfect vessel." A pulse of terror coursed through my body as I realized the truth. The fear the guard had orchestrated was a mere prelude to this darkness, this entity that sought to consume the remnants of my sanity. I felt the shadows stir and writhe, hungry for the essence of whatever light I had left. "No, you don't own me," I screamed, but the creature let loose a horrible, wretched laugh that echoed through the void, sending shivers down my spine. "Your defiance only feeds us," it cooed, slithering closer, the blackness billowing around its form. "And you will beg for freedom when the time comes." In that moment, I felt my grip on reality begin to wane. The shadows clawed at my mind, tempting me with promises of release and solace. My vision blurred, fractured images flashing before Mephises, twisting in agony, desperate hands reaching out for help, disappearing into the darkness before I could grasp them. Without warning, the dark entity lunged to close the distance, its form folding in on itself as it became a whirlpool of darkness. I could sense it unraveling the thin strands of my consciousness, inching closer with each heartbeat. Suddenly, a flash of thinking emerged from the depths of my panic. "I have to fight," I gasped, struggling to focus on the shard of mirror still clutched tightly in my hand. The jagged edge glimmered, piercing the gloom with a hint of defiance. The moment I pressed it to my palm, an electric shock coursed through my veins, a surge of warmth that momentarily illuminated the void around me. "This is my choice," I cried out, feeling an unfamiliar power building deep within, pushing back against the tendrils of despair. But instead of light driving these shadows away, they recoiled, screeching in fury, and I felt the ground beneath me quake once more, shifting and spiraling into an abyssal vortex. And then everything halted, the vacuum of silence swallowing me whole, and as I hovered on the brink of consciousness, I felt it Againa cold hand brushing my ankle, more persistent this time, dragging me deeper into an unfathomable chasm. The fear erupted into a violent roar as the very fabric of the void began to unravel, pulling apart at the seams, revealing glimpses of a grotesque future looming just beyond my reach. "Embrace the darkness," the guard whispered, his sinister smile breaking through reality as I began my descent into that horrifying abyss, the echoes of my screams mingling with the laughter of the damned. The shadows awaited, eager to claim another lost soul. The descent felt eternal, an unending plunge into an oppressive unknown that swallowed the light and twisted time itself. Yet it wasn't the absence of sight that gnawed at my sanity. It was the whirling chaos of murmurs that surrounded me, a symphony of secrets cloaked in despair. Each pulse of touch from the shadows sent electric spikes of dread through my body, igniting long-buried memories, whispers of my childhood and dark imaginings that had lurked beneath my bed. Suddenly, I was aware of the ground beneath me. I landed amid a nauseating thud, my body jolting against a surface not of earth but something far more sinister, matted fur, slick and warm, slick as viscera. A gasp escaped my lips as I instinctively scrambled to pull away from the grotesque realization beneath me. The world around gradually revealed its shape, grotesque forms of twisted limbs and shadowy figures rising from a murky landscape. They shifted like branches in the wind, so close, yet shrouded in a thick veil of darkness. Desperation clawed at me. The shadows surrounding me felt sentient. They twisted into shapes of people I knew, friends lost to time, family members I thought I knew. Their faces were warped, mouths stretched into chilling grins, eyes devoid of hope. "You should have joined us," one whispered with a voice dripping in malice, its head cocking at an unnatural angle. "You wanted a way out, didn't you?" "No." My voice quaked, a sob tearing through. The moment I opened my mouth, the chorus grew louder, drowning me in a cacophony of accusations and mockery. They chanted my failures, my fears, constructing a web of guilt around me. My heart raced as I fought against the tide of voices that threatened to engulf me. "You're nothing without us," they shrieked as shadows coiled tighter around my limbs, before despair consumed me. I caught sight of a flickering light breaking through the darkness, a shimmering spark that hummed with untapped energy. Grasping at the hope it offered, I pushed forward, drawing closer. But as I approached, the light morphed into a radiant iron eye that seemed to look through the very marrow of my soul. A shudder coursed through me as I realized this was not a beacon of hope. It was a sentry, a sentinel of this realm of shadows. Its luminescent gaze pierced into the abyss, locking onto me. I stumbled back. A scream choked in my throat as horrible recognition flashed through my mind. The guard had been watching, not merely observing, but relishing my suffering from afar. "You think you can escape?" It chuckled, a sound like broken glass scraping against metal. "So naive. You've already given yourself over to the darkness by coming here." Suddenly, the ground beneath me erupted. A surge of gnarled roots shot up, twisting around my body like serpents constricting their prey. I felt panic swell as the roots began dragging me back toward the eye. "Resist, and your deepest horror will become your reality," the eye hissed, its voice reverberating like a hunting call. I could feel it worming its way into my psyche, but I seethed against it. With all my strength, I yanked and kicked, twisting my body free from the root's grasp just enough to reach for the shard of mirror still clutched in my hand. I thrust it toward the eye, feeling the jagged edge pulse like a heartbeat. Light erupted from it, pulsing like a distant star, casting shadows back into the churning void. But there was only a momentary reprieve. As the light flared, a ravenous growl erupted from the depths of the darkness, echoing and swirling around me like a storm. The figures contorted into monstrous shapes, their skins glistening, eyes wide with fury. "You think you can reject us? We are your truth." The eye blinked, narrowing into a menacing slit. "You cannot flee, you have already lost." Everything crashed around me as if the darkness were now breaking, shattering like glass. I felt the remnants of the abyss start to pull apart, facing a new horror as an array of monstrous faces emerged through the rifts, their mouths stretching wide in grotesque laughter. Where was the edge? Could feel myself being siphoned into their wretched embrace, vision slipping into a kaleidoscope of grotesque colors. As whispers crescendoed into an agonizing roar, my heart raced frantically, a presence looming behind me with violent intent. Just as the world began to fall away, I turned. The guard stood mere inches away, a sinister smile plastered across his face. "You've finally come to understand," he grinned, his eyes glimmering with malicious delight. "But the real horror has just begun." With those words, the abyss erupted into a chaotic whirl, and as I braced for the worst, a chilling laugh surrounded me. "Goodbye, my dear," the guard whispered, pulling the shadows into him, and then I felt myself being swallowed whole. The light faded, and the world beyond my grasp imploded into darkness once more, leaving me teetering on the edge of madness. And then, nothing but voices. "You belong to us." The void was alive with echoing whispers, a relentless tide that swelled and receded around me, consuming every fragment of my very being. I floundered in it, struggling to find a foothold in this abyss that threatened to engulf me whole. And just when I believed I was drowning, a sudden shift enveloped me, pulling me through the suffocating tendrils of the darkness into something different, something almost tangible, yet infinitely disconcerting. The air this time was heavy with a sweetness I expected to flee from, but it clung to me like an unwanted lover's embrace. I gasped as my surroundings began to materialize, like a bad dream unraveling into familiar shapes. I found myself within a long, narrow corridor, lined with poorly lit fluorescent lights flickering ominously above. The walls were marred with peeling paint, and the floor beneath my feet felt sticky and uncertain, as if reluctant to bear my weight. "Where am I?" I murmured, my voice trembling, sound swallowed by the oppressive ambience. The walls felt like they were pressed in too closely, each step echoing like a hollow drum. As I moved forward, I began to notice that I was not alone. The corridor pulsed with slow-moving shadows that coiled in corners, darting back into dim alcoves whenever I caught sight of them. Each flicker teased my resolve, feeding on my growing paranoia. Clenching the shard of mirror tightly, I remembered the eye, the guard, the sinister resonance of the darkness that seemed to nestle beneath my skin. My heart raced as the shapes elongated and morphed, whispers twisting from shadow to shadow, coiling around me like a serpent preparing to strike. They seemed to mock my plight, stinging my ears with fragmented echoes of my past traumas, dredging forth the fears I thought long buried. Suddenly, I halted. A figure stood at the end of the corridor, a shadow that appeared solid amidst the undulating darkness. It was tall, with an unmistakable familiarity that sent a cold shiver racing down my spine. It stood unnaturally still, an almost perfect mimicry of the guard. But this one was different. The ensemble of shadows writhing around it formed an almost tangible armor of despair and anguish. "Welcome back," it intoned, a voice oozing with familiarity as it echoed through the narrow confines. "You thought we would forget you? No, this is where you belong." Feeling bile rise in my throat, I took a hesitant step back, dread pooling in my stomach. "No, I escaped. I have to get out of here," I pleaded, my voice breaking as fear overwhelmed me. The figure's mouth twisted into a sickening grin, revealing teeth that glistened like shards of glass. "You cannot escape what you are," it taunted, stepping closer, shadow stretching like talons towards me. "We are intertwined, you and I. You crave the darkness, don't you? It's why you returned." Horrifying memories flooded me. I recalled the night of my descent, the whispers tempting me to give in to the madness, the way I had felt the shadows beckoning. "I didn't ask for this," I screamed, tears burning in my eyes. "Oh, but you did," the figure sang, stretching out its hand, dark tendrils writhing like spiders seeking solace in the light. "You wanted to understand. You wished for clarity but have instead uncovered the truth you fear most, a truth that will haunt you eternally." Another silhouette slithered into view beside the figure, and then another. A horde of specters began to emerge, their faces shifting and twisting into grotesque parodies of those I once knew. Each was draped in a shroud of shadow, A chorus of familiar voices now hauntingly unrecognizable. "Join us," they beckoned, fingers reaching, voices overlapping in a tumultuous swell. The corridor started to warp, walls pulsating as if breathing, closing in on me like the maw of some great beast. "No!" I shouted defiantly, swinging my shard of mirror wildly. Bursts of light erupted with every movement, but it only seemed to agitate the figures. A surge of energy was pulsing within me. The mirror was hungry for the shadows, but it felt like a curse rather than a blessing. The figures hesitated, recoiling slightly, revealing just glimpses of their true forms, mutated and distorted, writhing in agony as if the light scorched their very essence. "You think light can repel us? You only feed the darkness, child." The guard appeared again, looming large, his smile grotesque. "I told you, everything you do brings you deeper into our embrace." In that moment, a chilling realization seized me. I was trapped in a diabolical cycle, forever teetering on the fringes of light and shadow, dawn and dusk. Just as fingers grasped at my skin, pulling me back toward the horde, I spotted a glimmer further down the corridor, a doorway flickering with the promise of escape. My instincts screamed at me to run, but would it only lead to another horror? With every ounce of strength I had left, I tore my gaze from the figures, fixing my eyes on that sliver of hope. I sprinted, breath ragged, my heart pounding with fear and desperation. The voices grew louder, a cacophony of cries and laughs echoing as they reached out for me, but I couldn't falter. As I approached the door, I felt a cold hand latch onto my ankle, dragging me down, the darkness beneath me yawning wide to consume me anew. Just before I reached the threshold, I caught a glimpse of the guard's grin, his eyes ablaze with malevolence. "You will never escape your reality," he snarled, and with that, the shadows surged forward, closing in on me. In a final, desperate attempt, I kicked free, lunging towards the door. But just as I crossed the threshold, a voice echoed one last time, chilling my bones enough to stop me in my tracks. "Welcome home." The weight of despair crashed over me like a tidal wave, and before I could react, darkness swallowed me whole once more. As I fell, a chilling sense of finality washed over, leaving me questioning whether I had ever truly escaped, or if this was just another twisted iteration of my eternal nightmare. As I drifted through the suffocating darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that the corridor behind me was transforming into something insidious, contorting and shifting as if the shadows had stopped playing a game and were now crafting a trap to ensnare me. The whispers, now awash in a symphony of malevolent laughter, wrapped around my consciousness, threading through my thoughts. I had barely registered the shifting metrics of time. How long had I truly been swallowed by this void? A weightlessness enveloped me, and suddenly, the sensation shifted as my body collided with an unseen surface. I tumbled into a new space. The sudden jolt disoriented me. I was sprawled on cold tiles that exuded a stench, a morose blend of dampness and decay, and as I gathered my bearings, I felt a tug against the very fabric of my being, as if something was pulling me back toward the murky depths from which I had just escaped. Scrambling to my feet, my heart pumped in erratic rhythms, mirroring the frantic whispers that now painted the air thick with dread. I stood alone in a dimly lit room, walls lined with mirrors that warped the reflections of me, twisting every feature grotesquely like a carnival of terrors. Beyond the reflections, the edges of the mirrored surfaces softened, blurring reality with each flicker of that accursed light. "Run," a voice hissed from somewhere deep within the reflections, the words laced with desperation. "Don't look back." Instinctively, I turned to glance behind me, but there was no visible exit, only a deteriorating backdrop of cracked plaster, which echoed the pale specters that lingered in the glass. The feeling of being observed prickled the hairs on my arms. I was distinctly aware of the figures standing on the periphery of the mirror's shadows of torment, each face a haunting relic of sorrow. They remained still, like a vivid nightmare frozen in time, waiting for a moment of weakness to pounce. I pressed myself against the closest mirror, frantically banging my palms against its surface. The glass rippled and warped beneath my touch, sending vibrations of chaos dancing throughout the room. Each pulse quickened the shadow's movements, drawing closer as they twisted in anticipation. "Leave us!" I roared with a strength I didn't know I possessed, heart hammering against my ribcage, pushing against panic. The response came swiftly. The air thickened, swirling with a howling wind that echoed with the cries of those I had loved and lost. Their faces morphed in the glass, mouths opening in a wailing symphony, yearning for release, consuming me with their despair. "Open the door!" I shrieked, my voice bouncing back at me like a taunt. "Let me out! I don't belong here!" But the shadows only laughed, a cacophony of distorted giggles reverberating through the air, driving me further into a frenzy. I turned to look for the origin of the voice that had warned me run, but the horror strung tight within the mirrors seemed to hold me hostage, by roots that entwined my sanity. Suddenly, a shattering scream pierced through, ripping me from my spiraling thoughts. A grotesque figure emerged from the heart of the distorted reflections, clawing its way into reality. It wore the visage of a guard, but the features that manifested were grotesque mockeries of humanity. Its eyes were hollow voids, drenched in a black ichor that oozed down its face, whispering dark secrets of despair I longed to forget. "You should have known better than to betray us," it rasped, the very air around me vibrating with malice. "Now you belong to us, forever entwined in our flesh and shadows." Desperation propelled me into a sprint, weaving through the labyrinth of mirrors, but behind me, the guard followed, each footfall echoing through my mind like a drumbeat of my impending doom. "Back to us!" he roared, an unholy howl that sent tremors through the air, a distortion of reality reverberating against the reflective glass that flickered ominously. I seized a mirror's edge, my breath hitching as the glass shimmered, its surface almost inviting. What if? I thought, wondering if, surrendering to the darkness, to the torment my being craved, might be the only escape that if the guards had sensed my doubt. They surged forward in twisted harmony, their outstretched hands reaching for me. I felt a sudden warmth emanate from the glass, pulsating with potential, calling me in, promising solace. But the laughter of the shadowed figures was growing louder, more insistent, drowning my thoughts in a tide of chaos. With a final rallying cry, I hurled myself towards the inviting shimmer, the fabric of reality stretching as limbs of shadow clawed greedily around my ankles. But just as I crashed against the glass, fragments of tortured echoes filled my ears, propelling me into unknown darkness. The light extinguished. The last thing I saw were those familiar faces melded into grotesque visions of taunting horror. Just before the world fell away entirely, I felt the kiss of coolness envelop my spirit, a last whisper teasing my consciousness. "You will never escape." And then, silence. The darkness shifted, coalescing into something almost palpable, and a cold breath swept over me, a chilling herald of dread that invaded my senses as I navigated the labyrinthine void. Darkness wrapped around my limbs, and I drifted not blissfully, but like a moth trapped in the coils of an unseen predator. In that agonizing stillness, I tried to reorient my mind, desperate to remember how I had arrived here. But recollection slipped through my fingers like dust. I was no longer the person I had been. My fear pulsed with a life of its own, transforming me into some creature of instinct. I found my feet beneath me again, the faintest echoes of mirth and despair trailing the path I had traveled. Though there settled a veil of silence now, the itch at the back of my mind screamed that the hunt was far from over. Something, or someone, was watching. I stumbled ahead through the thickening mist, fighting the nausea that surged within me. The void had abandoned me. I was engulfed entirely within the prison of broken thoughts and dark memories. Just as I was about to succumb to panic, a flicker of light caught my eye at the corridor's end, a feeble glow amidst unnerving shadows. Though it appeared faint, it sparkled with promise, a sliver of hope against the pervasive dark. Drawing closer, I found an old door, its surface warped and splintered, yet it beckoned with the warmth of the light pouring through the gap beneath it. I pressed my palm against the wood, feeling the low pulse of something alive within, faint but persistent. My heart raced. Maybe, just maybe, this was my way out. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed the door ajar. The hinges protested with a tortured creak, sending shivers racing down my spine. Gritting my teeth, I stepped through the threshold into an adjoining room. A stark contrast emerged in that space, filled with flickering lanterns and tattered remnants of what seemed a forgotten past. Scattered papers littered the floor, their whispers lost yet familiar as my eyes adjusted to the dim illumination. I saw figures scattered throughout the room, human shapes swaying like they were ensnared in a dance with the shadows. As dread took root in my gut, I realized these were faces I recognized. Lost souls echoing back to memories I'd buried long ago. They were former friends and loved ones, trapped in sorrow yet somehow aware of my presence. "Help us," a voice echoed, barely a whisper, swirling with desperation. I turned to find a woman I had known, her face drawn with terror, eyes wide with despair. "You can't stay here. It will take you too." But the shadows pulsed and writhed, creating a maelstrom of confusion as I staggered back, overwhelmed by the cacophony of their anguish. The shadows reached for me, blending their despair with the warmth of the flickering light. My instinct screamed to flee, yet something deeper pulled me inexorably forward. Compelled to help, tendrils of darkness brushed against my skin, caressing with a loving tenderness that belied the very blasphemy I sensed. As they twisted around my feet, weaving through the air like silk, the room cried out in terror, shadows swirling into grotesque forms trying to reclaim their love, those faces now morphing to mask the very essence of my nightmares. "Please," I gasped, feeling their icy clutches tighten around my chest. The room began to convulse, reality skewing, as if it were an unraveled tapestry, each thread pulling apart the seams of my sanity. I clawed at my own skin, desperate to rid myself of the encroaching darkness while the lanterns flickered and waned. Then the laughter surged, an avalanche of cackling voices entwined with shrieking agony, the tones morphing into a sinister melody. "Join us, stay with us," it beckoned, weaving through my thoughts, and for a heart-stopping moment, I felt the seductive embrace of despair, whispering promises of eternal rest. "Don't listen," the faces cried, their features contorted with anguish, but fear gripped my heart, allowing the shadows to draw me closer, their intoxicating call clamoring for dominance over my wavering will. I raised my hands, trembling yet resolute, brushing against the nearest figure, but it dissipated into smoke at my touch, snatched away by the insatiable darkness. That moment, a crash resounded, a window shattered, sending shards of glass spearing through the air like arrows of fate. A sinister howling roared as the door I had come through slammed shut, sealing my fate. The shadows neared, and I felt the icy claws retreat and regroup, waiting for me to succumb to the coming onslaught. But before I could think, I turned towards the lanterns, their light flickering fervently, reaching tentatively toward me. In the blend of despair, I realized, I need to break the cycle, to shatter the mirrors. I felt the pulse quicken within the lanterns. Maybe their warmth was the key to unraveling the web that ensnared us all. "Hold on," I shouted, my voice clawing its way through the laughter, and lunged toward the flickering lights. But just as I grasped one, a wave of darkness surged, sweeping through the room, and with it came the unmistakable feeling that there was a predator lurking, ready to pounce. Before I could escape the grasp of what lay within the shadows, they swarmed faster, drowning my cries in their chaos, and a freezing grip seized my throat. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the shadows coalescing into the form of that guard, its ichorous eyes gleaming with hunger, whispering, "You are one of us now." And then, everything was gone. Darkness swallowed me whole once more. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I had fought so hard, grasping at threads of hope while desperately seeking the light. Yet, as I floated in this suffocating void, an overwhelming dread consumed me. I could feel them surrounding tortured souls of the past, faces twisted in eternal agony, their whispers wrapping around my consciousness like coarse rope. Here, within the clutches of despair, I realized the battle had never truly been mine to win. "Welcome back," echoed a haunting voice, the guard, his tone dripping with malicious glee that sent a shudder ripping through my being. "Why won't you let us go?" I cried, but my voice was mere breath against the encroaching darkness. "You belong to us," he grinned, stepping out from the shadows, illuminated cruelly by a sliver of ghostly light filtering through the darkness. "You washed away their pasts, wrapping yourself in their horror now. You share in their fate, no, it couldn't be. My heart raced as I darted frantically through the void, seeking any semblance of an escape. The shadows writhed around me, taunting, each edging closer as though hunger filled the air. I stumbled, falling to my knees, tears of despair prickling at the corners of my eyes. Join us, they beckoned. A chorus of pleading voices that fluctuated through the abyss, pooling into a smooth whisper. It's freeing, don't resist. Against everything that was me, a dark urge began to coil within. I didn't want this. I didn't want to believe them or surrender. But as I shook my head in defiance, a dreadful sense of inevitability washed over me. I had spent so long grappling with shadows, trying to outrun the specters of my past. The walls of this encroaching darkness now felt familiar, and in every mirror lies the answer. The guard cooed. A sheen of wicked delight glittered in his hollow eyes. Look deep, and you will see your truth. That I whipped around to the void, finding a staggering number of mirrors now reforming around me, warped reflections shimmering in layers. I felt the flickering pull, a terror mixed with understanding. These weren't simply reflections, they were memories warped by shadows laid bare. A flash of my reflection greeted me, twisted and grotesque, a cruel mimicry of the person I once knew. Then I noticed the others, standing behind me in torment. Their faces familiar yet alien, lips moving without sound, forming a nameless scream that echoed my own heartache. Enough. I shouted, my anger rising out of desperation. I fell forward, frantically grappling, fingertips slamming against the first mirror, cracking the surface. Light exploded outward, radiating with power, illuminating the faces around. Shadows writhed, shrieking as the brilliance burned bright. But just as the light began breaking through, something deeper shifted within me. A voice, serene yet insidious, whispered, do you really want to unleash them? The saviors you seek are the ones who called you home. No. I screamed, and with that denial came a surge of desperate clarity. This was manipulation. The voice of the guard rang loud, caging me, his laughter battering against my resolve. Before I could rethink, I picked up a piece of the mirror that teetered on the precipice of shattering the chains binding our souls. Just as I thrust it against the glass, replicating my former actions in this twisted reflection of truth, the room shook, shadows lashing out as they felt their hold unravel. And then it broke. Cracked glass splintered through the air, sending shards flying, and as they fell, the faces danced with joy, their anguish suddenly woven into grief, blossoming like wilted flowers seeking the sun. Let them go, I cried, finally exhaling, knowing now what they truly needed. I hurled shard after shard, watching the darkness retreat, clawing back into the corners of despair. And then it hit. Final mirror stood before us, the biggest horror of them all, thrumming with life, beckoning with sinister allure. And I shook my head, realizing with horror what it meant. You could never. Rushing towards it, I took a leap, plunging the shard deep within the reflective surface while the shards of shattered memories whirled around like fallen stars. The moment it pierced, tendrils of dark energy lashed at me ferociously, screams of the captive souls echoing as I struggled against that primordial force. But I refused to falter. I pressed through the screams, feeling them merge with my energy, tears of resolute freedom spilling into the void. The last shadow, the embodiment of the guard, swirled violently before me, his monstrous form shifting into something even more grotesque, a physicalization of despair incarnate, the same twisted grin gracing his face. You cannot fight destiny. His voice slithered, melding with the pain of the lost. I forced my eyes wide open, locking gazes with that apparition, clutching the shard even tighter, determined as my heart raced. You're wrong. I will not succumb to this darkness anymore. I lunged forward, driving the shard deep into the heart of that final mirror. A deafening silence swallowed the cacophony of chaos, and for a fleeting moment, nothing existed except that single act of defiance. Then, like a million shards unleashed, light erupted, shattering the abyss into a cacophony of radiant energy. But just as the light threatened to envelop everything, a white-hot glint appeared at the edge of my Visiona reflection that bore a resemblance to the guard. His mouth twisted into that same haunting smile before darkness clawed at my vision. And then, there was silence. When I woke, I was lying on the cold floor of my living room. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating everything that had seemed so grotesque and sinister mere moments before. I inhaled deeply, the air sweet with post-dawn clarity. Victory? I leaned back against the wall, and yet deep within, a whisper echoed, tightening around my heart. I glanced towards the door I had so recklessly opened. The remnants of the night flooded back, drowning me with memories of horror. I slowly rose, each subtle sound amplifying the weight of uncertainty in my chest. That's when I caught my reflection. I stood in the mirror, and as I locked eyes with it, the chill crept back into my bones. My features were distorted, just for a moment traced with shadows. A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth, sinister and knowing. And for one terrifying heartbeat, I could feel that dark presence dwell within my eyes, promising that the darkness would never truly leave me. As I turned away, chills swept up my spine, and I knew deep down that the hunt had only begun anew. And in the back of my mind, an ever-present whisper seeped, reminding me that the darkness was never truly gone. It simply lurked, waiting for its chance to return. In the dance between light and dark, sometimes it's the shadows that lead.